Hello, this is Delia again, and I have another story in the Scary Stories 3 More Tales to Chill Your Bones. It says, Woo, there are 4 ghosts, a ghostly monster, and a corpse in this chapter. But the stories about them are funny, not scary. Strangers. A man and a woman happened to sit next to one another on a train. The woman took out a book and began reading. The train stopped a half a dozen stations, but she never looked up once. The man watched her for a while, then asked, What are you reading? It's a ghost story, she said. It's a very good, very spooky ghost story. Do you believe in ghosts? He asked. Yes, I do, she replied. There are ghosts everywhere. Well, I don't believe in them, he said. It's just a lot of superstition. In all my years, I've never seen a ghost, not one. Haven't you? The woman said, and vanished. The Hog. When Arthur and Anne were in high school, they fell in love. They were both big, fat, and jolly, and seemed suited to one another. But as sometimes happened, things didn't work out. Arthur moved away and married someone else, and Anne didn't marry anyone. And not too many years later, she got sick and died. Some said it was from a broken heart. One day, Arthur was driving to a small town not far from where he and Anne had grown up. Soon he realized that a hog was following him. No matter how fast Arthur drove, the hog stayed right behind. Each time he looked back, there was the hog. It began to irritate him. Finally, he couldn't stand it any longer. He stopped his car and rapped the hog on its snout good and hard. Get out of here, you fat, dirty thing, he shouted. To his astonishment, the hog spoke to him, and it was Anne's voice he heard. It's her ghost, he thought. She has come back as a hog? I was doing no harm, Arthur, the hog said. I was just out for a brisk walk, enjoying myself. How could you strike me after all that we meant to one another? With that, she turned and trotted away. Is something wrong? A car broke down late at night, way out in the country. The driver remembered passing an empty house a few minutes earlier. I'll stay there, he thought. At least I'll get some sleep. He found some wood in the corner of the living room and made a fire in the fireplace. He covered himself with his coat and slept. Toward morning, the fire went out, and the cold awakened him. It'll be light soon, he thought. Then I'll go for help. He closed his eyes again, but before he could doze off, there was a terrible crash. Something big and heavy had fallen out of the chimney. It lay on the floor for a minute, then it stood up and stared down at him. The man took one look and started running. He had never seen anything so horrible in his life. He paused just long enough to jump through a window. Then he ran and ran and ran and ran until he thought his lungs would burst. As he stood in the road panting and trying to catch his breath, he felt something tap him on the shoulder. He turned and found himself staring into 2 big, bloody eyes in a grinning skull. It was the horrible thing. Pardon me, it said. Is something wrong? Ew. It's him. The woman was the meanest, most miserable person you could imagine, and her husband was just as bad. The only good thing was that they lived in the woods all by themselves and couldn't bother anybody else. One day they were off somewhere getting firewood, and the woman got so mad at her husband that she grabbed an axe and cut his head off, just like that. Then she buried him nice and neat and went home. She made herself a cup of tea and went out on the porch. She sat there rocking in her rocking chair, sipping her tea, thinking how glad she was that she had what thinking about how glad she was that she had done this awful thing. After a while, she heard this old, empty voice out in the distance, moaning and groaning, and it was saying, Who? Who's going to stay with me this cold and lonely night? Who? It's him, she thought, as she hollered back. Stay by yourself, you old goat. Soon she heard the voice again, only now it was closer. It was saying, "Who's going to sit with me this cold and lonely night? Who?" "Only a crazy man," she shouted. "Sit by yourself, you dirty rat." Then she heard the voice even closer, and it was saying, "Who's going to be with me this cold and lonely night? Who?" "Nobody," she sneered. "Be by yourself, you miserable mole." She stood up to go into the house, but now the voice was right behind her, and it was whispering, "Who's going to stay with me in this cold and lonely night? Who?" Before she could answer back, a big hairy hand came around the corner and grabbed her, and the voice hollered, "You are."